Welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Poker. This is the most complete guide to understanding how to play poker, and then we're going to get specifically into the variant that is the most popular variant in the world, which is No Limit Texas Hold'em. We're going to get into all the details, some history about poker. We're going to talk about how to play poker. We're going to talk about hand rankings, which is true across all variants of poker, and we're going to specifically later focus on the play of Texas Hold'em poker, the cadence of play, the positions, the blinds, pre-flop, flop, turn, river. You'll learn what all those things are later on in this tutorial, and betting, calling, and raising, which are how the game's played. So just a little bit of background in poker here. Poker is a betting card game that ranks players' hands against each other. So everybody has a hand, and the player with the best hand wins the money. Poker involves skill and luck. You have the skill aspect of being able to read people and understand them. You know, everybody's heard about bluffing and all that. Is someone acting nervous? Skill in understanding odds. It's important to understand, what your odds are to win a hand and what size of a bet you might want to be able to call. Dozens of poker variants. There is Texas Hold'em. There is Omaha. There is Big O. There is Deuce to 7 triple draw. Dozens and dozens of different variants of poker. Today we're just going to be talking about Texas Hold'em because in any casino that you walk into, if there is a poker table there, it will be Texas Hold'em. Poker is often compared to chess, a game with no luck, because of the advantage you have when you understand your opponent and how they play. And the better understanding you have of the game and how it's played, the better you are. Chess is a 100% skill, zero luck game. So there's no chance in chess that you're going to beat someone who's better than you. If they're better than you, they will beat you every time. The beauty of poker is you can be worse than someone and still beat them. And still beat them pretty frequently. Eventually, skill will catch up with you, and eventually more skilled player has the upper hand, but that takes a lot of hands and it takes a lot of time. So it's a game where anyone can just come in and you can beat the best in the world in 50 hands, 100 hands, no problem. In 2003, poker shot to popularity with movies like Rounders, and Chris Moneymaker, who was a online player who won a $35 satellite and won a satellite, which is a type of tournament where he won a $10,000 ticket and then proceeded to win that event. I believe it was about 800 people, so I think he won a few million there. No Limit Texas Hold'em is the variant that we're going to learn today. It's a form of poker where a player tries to make the best 5-card hand from 7 cards. So you have 7 total cards. You try to make the best 5-card hand. The 7 cards consist of 2 whole cards, that are dealt to each player, which they keep to themselves, obviously you don't show. And then 5 community cards that everyone sees and everyone shares, and you use those 7 cards to make the best hand. This is the most popular form of poker for the last at least 25 years. Before that, it was Limit Hold'em, and then there were other variants that were popular over the years, but this is the one that has stuck out in more recent years as the most popular. It was called the Cadillac of Poker by a very famous, rest in peace, Doyle Brunson. It is the most studied game of poker, so there are a lot of people out there that are studying it, that are trying to improve. It is the most researched game of poker, so you'll chances are, if you're playing Texas Hold'em, you could run into someone who is very skilled and knows what they're doing, and has a significant advantage. And one thing about No Limit Texas Hold'em is obviously the first 2 words, no limit there. There's no maximum bet size at any point in the game. You can raise to as much as the money you have in front of you. You can't just like reach in your pocket and pull out extra money, but whatever's sitting in front of you, you can bet. So how do you win at poker? You win with the best hand at Showdown, which is at the end of the game when everybody shows. Or you can win if you can make all of the other players fold. You don't have to show your hand, and you just take whatever money's in the middle. When you win the whole pot. The pot is the money that was wagered in the current round and all the preceding rounds of betting. There are exceptions. People who are watching know you can split the pot in cases where both players have the same equity hand, but it's a detail that's not super important for this intro to poker here. So we're getting into how to play poker. So there are made hands and not made hands. So we're going to talk about the made hand types first. So if you're familiar with a deck of cards, you have 4 suits, each with 13 individual values in that suit. They go from 2 to 10, and Jack, Queen, King, Ace. So I'm hoping that anyone watching this video has familiarity with a deck of cards. You're going to need that to proceed further. 2 cards of the same value across different suits. So a 2 and a 2, or a 5 and a 5, or a Jack and a Jack. 3 cards of the same value, which would be 3 7s, 3 10s, or 4 cards of the same value, which are all 4 of the 10s, all 4 of the queens, or all 4 of the jacks, whatever it happens to be. Those are some examples of made hands. 5 cards in a row, sequentially, with no gaps. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be an example of a straight. And then 5 cards of the same suit in any order is a flush. If you have 5 hearts, or 5 clubs, or 5 spades, 5 diamonds, that's going to be a flush. So here's an example of 2 cards of the same suit, 3 cards of the same suit, and 4 cards of the same suit. A straight, again, we see the cards are not the same suit, meaning not the same symbol. There are 5 in a row right there. The flush, which is just 5 of the same suit. What is the best hand? People want to play poker. They come in, they say, oh, I want to try, what's the best hand I can get? And I say, royal flush, all right. And then they go for a royal flush. And every time they play, they try to get a royal flush. Well, that's just not going to happen, so it's not important. What's the most common hand? A high card hand. So a high card hand is what we were talking about before. We talked about the made hands. That's pair, 2 pair, 3 of kind, straight, flush, full house, all of that. A high card hand is a non-made hand. It is just, you have no pairs, you have no flush, you have no straight, you just have 5 cards, and they don't have anything in common, they're not sequential. That is considered a high card hand. The example up here, number 10 here, would be a king high hand. So your first made hand, your lowest value made hand, is a pair. 2 cards of the same value. Obviously, they're going to be different suits. Then we have the next highest hand, which is 2 pair. It takes 4 cards. In this example, we have a pair of jacks and a pair of 5s. It's the next strongest hand after a pair. Then the next strongest hand is the 3 of a kind. It takes 3 cards, but 3 that are all exactly the same value. A straight is 5 cards that are sequential. They can start with 2 all the way up to, they can start with a 10 and go up to an ace. In this example here, we see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then we have a flush, which we just talked about is even stronger than a straight, which is 5 of the same suit. Full house, so 3 of one value and 2 of another value. This is even stronger than a flush. This is one of the strongest hands you're going to see. This is probably the strongest hand you will see for a very long time. 4 of a kind, that's when you have 4 of all of the exact same value card. So in this case, it's 4 9s. And then we have a straight flush, which is all in order, all of the same suit. These are extremely rare. And then, of course, the rarest of the rare, which is a royal. You might see one of those every 100,000 hands, every 150,000 hands, maybe you'll have one. Aces have a special role, though. In the examples we saw on the previous page, we saw the royal flush. The ace was the highest card. The 10 was the lowest card. Aces can also be low. So aces are high in almost all situations. So when you're talking about pairs, flushes, full house, ace high straights. So if you had a pair of aces and someone else had a pair of 2s, your hand would win because you had a higher pair. The only time aces are used as a low card are in a straight, when you can use the ace as a 1 in a straight, essentially, where you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 card straight sequential starting with the ace. But that is the only time aces are low. When you're talking about pairs, full houses, flushes, all of that, aces are always high. So ties. What if the best hand is a high card hand, and more than one player has the highest card? So what if you have a high card king, and the other player has a high card king? Then you go down to the next highest card until there's no longer a tie. So you might say, well, we both have high card hands, so we split the pot. No, you have to keep going down from the highest card down until you get to the card where one player has a higher number. So you might both have king 10, or king and then 10, and then you have a 7 and the other player has a 9 as the next lowest card. Well, then he wins. You don't need to keep going down the rest of the way. It doesn't matter. His 9 will take that. We'll take that pot. So what if the best hand is a pair and more than one player has a pair? Highest pair wins. Aces are high in this case. Another example, if you have two tens and he has 2 jacks, then he wins. So what if the best hand is a straight and more than one player has a straight? The highest value card in the straight wins. So you might have ace 2, 3, 4, 5, and the other player might have 2, 3, 4, 5, and a 6, in which case that is the higher straight, and that player would win the pot. A flush. More than one person has a flush. The highest value card in that flush wins. Well, if they have a flush and the highest card in their hand is a 10, then you have a flush and the highest card in your hand is a king, then you would win that. You would win the pot there. A full house when more than one player has a full house. So the highest 3 of a kind. So maybe he has 3 6s and 2 10s, and you have 3 aces and 2 10s. Then in that case, you would win with the bigger 3 of a kind. Now, if you both have 3 aces and someone has 2 7s and 2 8s, then the 3 aces plus the 2 8s would win. We'll go over in more detail right now some of those examples. So here's an example of flush ranking and straight ranking. We have flushes and straights ranked by the highest card, as we know. In this example, this first hand on the left here is a jack high straight, which beats the 10 high straight. Then we have a flush example where we have an ace high flush. So maybe this player had ace 8 in their hand, and this player had king 10 in their hand. And the king high flush is going to lose to the ace high flush in this hand, in this case. Tiebreakers and kickers. Kickers apply for hand categories that don't use all 5 cards, for pair, 2 pair, 3 of a kind, and 4 of a kind. Kickers are cards that are not used in the made hand. We talked about this before. We have a made hand. We have a pair down here. That's a made hand, 3 of a kind. Now, flushes and straights for kickers don't matter. We talked about the tiebreakers for those. But this is for made hands that don't use all 5 cards. Both players have the same made hand, aces for example. Then the player with the highest kicker has the better hand and wins the pot. Always count down from high to low when we're ranking these kickers. So, for example, the hand on the left here is aces, king, jack, 7 as the kickers. And then we have over here aces with queen, jack, 7 as the kickers. So the highest kicker is the king. So the hand on the left beats the hand on the right. So we're going to go over some more hand ranking examples. So let's take a look at these 4 hands and take a minute, pause the video. Which hand in this list is number 1? Which hand is number 2? Which hand is number 3? And which hand is number 4? Go ahead and pause the video and then come back and I will reveal which are the highest. So the highest ranking hand here is the second one in the list here. This is a straight. A little hard to see here, but we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What is the next hand? That's right. It's the one on the bottom here. This is three of a kind. Three of a kind is a pretty powerful hand. It is the next strongest is a straight, so that's pretty strong. Then we have here two pair, which is the next strongest, next weakest hand. We're going from strong to weak here, by the way. Strongest, second strongest, third strongest. This is two pair again, kings and threes. And then the last hand here is just a lone pair. Looks like a flush. It's not a flush. Only four of the same suit. All right. Now let's look at these two hands. So now we're comparing two hands. So now we've come to Showdown here, and we've got two different hands. Which hand is stronger? Which hand outranks the other hand? So which of these hands is stronger here? What two made hands do we have here? Because we have two made hands here. What are these two hands called, and which one is stronger? Down here, we have two hands as well. What are these two hands, and which one is stronger? I'll reveal those for you right now. Of these two hands here, this hand on the left is higher. We have two kings with a queen kicker. Over here, we have two kings with just a jack kicker. Queen stronger than jack. Over here, we have two hands. We have a flush on the left, and we have a full house on the right. Full house beats a flush, so this hand on the right is better. Down here, we have a straight to the 8 here. 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And over here, we have a flush, ace high flush, which beats that, and that's the flush. Flush wins over here on the right. So that was 5 cards. Those were examples using 5 cards. Very easy when you see all 5 cards. What's the best hand? Because there's only 5 cards to see. But what about when there's 7 cards? Because that's what this game is about. This game is about choosing the best 5 cards from 7 total cards. So you have 2 extra cards you can kind of work with in there. So you get some extra cards in there. So here are 7 cards. Take a minute to take a look at this. Pause the video if you have to. And take a look and tell me what you think the best made hand is from these 7 cards. Alright, I'll tell you what the best made hand is from these 7 cards is. It's 2 pair. We have queens and 5s. It looks like there's a flush, but there isn't. It's just diamonds and hearts, and there's not 5 of either one of them, and of course there's no straight here, anything like that. Just 2 pair. Next hand here. What is the best made hand I can make from these cards? Well, I already see right away we have a pair of 9s. What else do we have? Oh, looks like we might even have a straight here. Do we have a straight? 2, 3? Nope, we don't have any 4s. What else do we have? Do we have anything else here? Well, we do have 5 spades, so this is a flush here. The best 5 card hand out of these 7 is a flush. Alright, I'll give you a minute to look at this next one. We do have 2 pair here. We certainly do. 10s and 9s. However, we also have 5 hearts. So that's a flush. Over here, what do we have? Take a look at this real quick. So we have a pair of 4s. Do we have a flush? We do not. We don't have 5 of any suit. Do we have a straight? 7, 8, 9, 10. Jack, that's 5. That's a straight. All right, what do we got here? Ooh, this is a tricky one. We have 3 kings. I see we have 3 kings there. That's a pretty strong hand, but it looks like we might. We don't have a flush for sure. We can see that because we don't have 5 of the same suit. But we do have 5 in a row. 10, jack, queen, king, and then ace being high. Remember that ace can be high in straights or low in straights. So we could go on and on and on forever and ever and ever on hand rankings. There's a lot of nuance to it. It takes a lot of experience and time to look at those and understand them. There's a lot of ways you can do that. You can get a deck of cards, deal them to yourself, try various different methods, try to go online. There's tutorials and all kinds of things about hand rankings. You can also, when you're playing at the casino, they'll give you a hand ranking card to show you what the hand rankings are, so that you can know them, because it takes some memorization to understand, and then once you have them memorized, you can play pretty easily. But that is hand rankings. You could do an entire video on hand rankings, but we're not going to, so I just wanted to touch on the high level. So, Texas Hold'em. What is Texas Hold'em? Texas Hold'em is a 5-card poker game where you are trying to make the best 5-card hand from the 2 cards in your hand, plus the 5 cards on the board called community cards. The 2 cards in your hand are called hole cards or hold cards. There is dispute in the community whether it's hole cards or hold cards. Well, I chose one, and it's hold cards for this entire presentation. I have no allegiance to either one. The community cards can be used by all players. So you'll see in the middle of this table here, we have 5 cards dealt face up that everybody can see, and then we have 2 cards for each person that only that person can see. These are the hold cards. These are the community cards. Players take turns, and play occurs clockwise. There will be 4 rounds of betting, commonly called streets. We have pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. Pre-flop, the first round of betting, when looking at only your hold cards. So below here, this represents pre-flop. So the flop is the second round of betting, when you're looking at your hold cards plus the first 3 community cards, which are all dealt at the same time. Then the betting will go around again. And then if there are still 2 or more players left in the hand, you will get the turn, in which 1 more card is dealt. Then there will be another round of betting. The river will be dealt, and there will be 1 more round of betting. And then all the 5 community cards will be out, and once that betting is done, then the game is over. With the flop, turn, and river, community cards will be dealt. With each of these streets, 1 card will be first dealt into the discard pile. So they will deal 1 card into this card pile, and then 3 for the flop, 1 card into the discard pile, and then 1 on the turn, 1 into the discard pile, and then 1 on the river. If a player bets, and the next player doesn't want to put any money in, they can just fold, and they're out. Player will be excluded from all the rest of the play after that. They will forfeit any chance they had to win the pot when you fold. So obviously there is some drawback. You don't have to put any more money in, but you can never win once you fold. After each street, the money that has been bet on that street is put into the pot, and then we have the pot. So as you have your pre-flop, the pot builds up a little bit. Then you have your flop. Then you have your turn. Then you have your river, and the pot is building on each street. There are 3 named positions at the table. Okay? We have the dealer, also called the button. We have the small blind, and we have the big blind. So the dealer, also called the button, will deal 2 cards one at a time to all the players at the table. The player can look at these cards, but will keep them hidden from the other players. The dealer will start dealing with the player to his immediate left, dealing around the table clockwise, ending with himself. The player to his immediate left is the small blind, and the player 2 to his left is the big blind. We have dealer here, SB for small blind, and BB for big blind. So they'll deal 1 to the small blind, and then big blind, and then going around and around, dealing himself last, and then another card all the way around to however many players are there, and himself last. Usually not more than 10 players at a table. Texas Hold'em is a blind game, so not all poker games involve blinds, but Texas Hold'em happens to do that. This means that 2 players are always required to put money in the pot before the hand begins, so they're required to bet before the hand begins, before they see their cards. And this position moves around the table, but this is considered to be the first bet. The money they're required to put in is called the blind itself. The 2 players that have to put in money are called the big blind and the small blind. The size of the big blind's bet is determined by the table stakes. So, when you're at a casino and you're playing and you are at a 1-2 table, like in this down here, $1, $2, that means that the big blind will be forced to put in $2 in the middle without seeing their cards, And the small blind will be forced to put in $1 without seeing their cards. They're called the small blind because their blind bet is half the size of the big blind. This keeps action in the game. This keeps everyone just folds and folds and folds until someone gets a hand. This forces some money into the middle so that there's something to play for everybody at the table. So there's something there. And it does move around the table, so it's not obviously the same person putting in $2 every single time. As the dealer moves around the table, they will get their chance to put in the $2. So we're going to talk about the first round of betting. That's the pre-flop round where you only see your 2 hole cards. This is the first round of play, the first round of betting. It begins once all the players are dealt their final their 2 hole cards. The player in the big blind spot is always the first bet of 1 big blind. We talked about that. He's betting blind. That is just the rule. There is no looking at your cards and saying, I don't want to play. That player always just has to put in 1 big blind. The first player to act is the player to the immediate left of the big blind. You'll see here in this graph, it's player number 4. The first player has 3 options. They can fold, which means to give up, not put any more money in, and be out of the hand. The cards are put into the discard pile, known as the muck, if he decides he wants to fold. He can call, so he can put the amount of the bet he's facing in and continue to play. In this case, 1 big blind. Or he can raise, which is a more complicated topic, but we'll discuss later, which means he can increase the size of the bet. But for now, we're just going to say he has these 3 options of how he can continue. The rest of the subsequent players have similar actions. So they can fold, they can call, or they can raise. They have all 3 options. That includes all the players up until the button. Now we're getting to the blinds in pre-flop play. The small blind, this player, if you remember from earlier, has put in half of 1 big blind. So he's already put some money into the pot. He will subtract that from whatever bet he's facing, whether it be a raise or simply a call. If he has half a big blind put in, and the bet to him is 1 big blind, he only has to put in half a big blind more to call. The big blind, this player has already put 1 big blind into the pot, so he will subtract 1 big blind from whatever bet he's faced with. So if the players before him called, he has no more money to put in. If he is faced with a 1 big blind bet, he's already put in 1 big blind, he can simply check and not put any more money in. Also, if everyone else folds, so all the players before him don't want to play, they don't like their hands, even the small blind, who only has to put in half of a big blind to play, decides he doesn't want to play, he will fold, and the big blind will be the last player left in the hand, and we cannot continue on to the next street with just 1 player, so he will just simply win the 1 big blind he put in and the half big blind that the small blind put in. Now we're getting into the betting rounds of the flop, turn, and river. The betting is exactly the same, and the play is exactly the same for the flop, the turn, and the river. After the first round of betting is complete, the next round will begin with 3 cards being dealt face up as the 3 community cards. On this round and all subsequent rounds, the first person to the left of the dealer who is still in the hand will be the first to act. So in our example down here below, we see the dealer as seat number 1 here, and we see the small blind as seat number 2. This is the first person that will have to make a decision on the flop. So there's 2 general categories of actions that we're going to talk about on the flop, turn, and river. We will talk about options when we are facing a bet and when we're not facing a bet. We're going to start off with the options for when we're not facing a bet, because the very first player to act on the flop is not facing a bet. So that player is not facing a bet, and they have two options. They can check. This allows them to stay in the hand, continue playing, continue to be eligible for the pot, but not put any more money in the middle. The other option they have is to bet, which means they will put more money in the middle, and all the other players still left in the hand will have to match that bet, raise it, or leave the hand. If you were to bet and everyone else leaves the hand, you would then win all of the money in the middle, including, of course, the money that you bet. There are 3 additional options that are available if you are facing a bet. So you are not the first one to act, and the person before you has not checked. They have made a bet. So if the person before you has bet, you can call, which means you'll put in the middle the amount of money that they bet. You will still be in the hand. You will still be eligible to win. You can raise. This means increase the size of their bet. So if they bet 1 big blind, you could raise it to 2, 3, 4, up to all of the money sitting in front of you. Or you could fold, meaning you don't want to put any more money in, so you're just going to fold. You're out of the hand. You're not eligible to win the pot anymore. After the flop betting is completed, the dealer will deal another card into the community cards. Betting will continue exactly as it did. After the turn is completed, the dealer will deal the last community card. So after we have gotten through all of the rounds of betting, we will get to what's called Showdown. In the example shown here, if player 1 checks or bets, and then player 2 calls or checks, and player 3 calls or checks, and player 4 calls or checks, everyone will show their hand, and whoever has the best hand will win the entire pot. So in this case, all 4 players got to Showdown without folding, and we see that the small blind in this case had 2 pair and won the hand. After Showdown, the pot is collected by the winner, and we start over at 0 as if we hadn't played any at all yet. We start fresh. The button moves 1 to the left, and the big blind and small blind also move 1 to the left. Not the actual player, they don't move. Just the button moves, and the person who was the big blind becomes the small blind, and a new person becomes the big blind. The last topic I want to talk about is raising. Raising is a little bit more complicated than betting, calling, and checking. So raising is an option that allows you to increase the size of the current bet. You can raise on any street. You can raise over calls, bets, or other raises. The raise size must be equal to the initial bet or the amount raised on the last raise. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. So let me walk you through it. Let's take an example. I bet 1 big blind. You want to raise me. You can raise me any amount greater than 1 big blind. 1.1 big blinds, 2 big blinds, 3 big blinds, 100 big blinds. You can't raise me less than 1 big blind. You can't say, you bet 1 big blind, I'm going to raise it to 1.5. Can't do that. Has to be at least 2 big blinds, because that is the amount of that raise. Another example is the one that I have down here. If the initial bet is 1 big blind and someone raises to 10. So I bet 1 big blind, the player to my left raises it to 10 big blinds, and you want to raise it further because you have a great hand. The current bet to you is 10 big blinds. It was raised over 1 big blind. So that is 9 big blinds more. So you can't raise less than 19 big blinds. So you can't make the bet less than 19 big blinds. You can make it 20, but you can't make it less than 19. So pre-flop, if you remember, the initial bet is 1 big blind. So you can't raise less than 2 big blinds when you want to raise pre-flop. You can do 2.1, you can do 2.01, you can do anything greater than 2, but nothing less than 2. And anyone who raises beyond that, so if you raise to 2 and someone raises to 5, the next person must raise to at least 8, because 2 to 5 is 3, and they must raise at least 3 more than that. So then as the play continues around, so if I bet 1, someone raises me to 2. The next player must call and put in at least 2 to continue playing. Then it goes back around to the original player who bet 1. They must match that raise to 2 or fold and be eliminated from the hand. Until it comes back to me, the original raiser, I may be facing even another raise. Someone may raise further. Several people may raise, and the bet may get bigger and bigger and bigger. You either have to call or raise or fold. So if it raises to like 100, and you're sitting there and you only have 50 in front of you, you can put the rest of that 50 in the middle. That's fine. You will only be eligible for a maximum of 50 from each player. And that's what we call a main pot. And then the side pot will be any additional money beyond that the other players can win who have more money. So here's an illustration of how raising works. We're on the turn here, and the small blind bets 10. He likes his hand. The big blind says, I'll come along. I still want to be eligible for the pot. I'm going to call your $10 bet. Then the player in the 4 spot here says, you know what? I'm going to raise it to 20, which is the minimum raise he can do here because it's 10 more than 10. The button says, I'm going to call that 20. Now we're back to the small blind. The small blind now has a decision to make. Am I going to raise even further because I really like my hand? Am I just going to call the 10 more? Or am I going to fold? He decides he doesn't want to call that 10 more, and he folds. Then the big blind has to make a decision. Is he going to call the 10 more, raise, or fold? And he opts to fold. Now, since he had 1 caller and 2 folds, there's no more action left. His raise did not get re-raised, and he has nothing more to do, so we will simply go to the river.